So, fallen Albion. First I should tell you what Albion is, as I heard some people asking what the hell Albion was. And Albion, for the purpose of this talk, is a word for the archaic England. But don't worry, I will make this comprehensible for my European and other friends. No problem. So we'll begin with the Bible. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh, yet his days shall be numbered 120 years. And there were giants on the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his hearts was only evil and continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping things, and the fowls of the earth, for it repenteth me that I have made them. This is a very troubling passage from Genesis, which has gathered all manner of driftwood from antiquity to build its ark. And it's planed it into shape, and it's patched all the gaps in its narrative with bitumen tar. And that black tar is the Sumerian corpus, and Atrahasis in particular. And so, over the course of the Bible, a theology was crafted in which a great flood destroys the giants, whose souls become the demons, and the fallen angels are imprisoned in hell, and the women who dallied with them are turned into sirens. So the flood is a division of worlds, of licit knowledge and illicit magic, a great forgetting, a denial of messages and messengers of knowledge encoded in times, tides, baleful and miraculous events. But the Ark of Genesis carries with it older stories, the demonized cultures and practices of idolatry and divination, and what we're here for today, magic. So to work with the fallen angels is to find our way back into that world. So the stories of the Bible fascinated me when I first read them, and they seemed extremely alien, even when read through the sonorous tones of the King James Bible, probably one of the greatest works of English literature. And it all seemed kind of abstract. There were these strange names, there were these strange creatures. But what changed for me, does this work? What changed for me was when I discovered that the giants and the angels had dwelling places. Now, the picture I have here is a site called Gilgal Rephaim. And when Moses moved into the ancient world of Canaan in 1000 BCE, he was moving them into a land which was already ancient. And so we begin with hunting for these giants, the Nephilim, the mighty men, the men of renown, who were the ancestral, mighty, feathered dead, who greet the fallen king when he returns to the underworld. It's these figures whom Isaiah mocks when he says, "O Hallel ben Shachar, how fallen art thou?" Or as we're more familiar with, "O Lucifer, how fallen art thou?" So this incredible structure is on the Golan Heights. It's of unknown purpose, but probably to do with rites of excarnation, by which we mean sky burial, where the mighty dead as unclean birds, the feathered dead, return as vultures and kites and feast upon the bodies of the dead. And I was also delighted to discover that in the same landscape, there are hundreds of these dolmen. Now, these are Bronze Age structures from 3000 BCE. Some of them are Chalcolithic, so that's 4000 BCE. So for a bit of context, King David is 1000 BCE. So they're moving into a land which is already filled with these enigmatic monuments and unknown stories and lost people. So with a land that was previously ruled by giants, their successors were now hunted out. We hear, for example, of the massive iron bed of the giant Og of Bashan, the last of the Rephaim in Deuteronomy and Numbers. And when the Bible says Og had a massive iron bed, he probably means a dolmen, a structure such as one of these. Now, the response in the Old Testament we find in Exodus, where it writes, "But ye shall destroy their altars, break their images, and cut down their groves. For thou shalt worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and go whoring after their gods, and do sacrifice unto their gods. And one call thee, and thou eat of his sacrifice, and thou take of their daughters and to thy sons, and their daughters go a whoring after their gods, and make their sons go a whoring after their gods. You shall make thee no molten gods," which is a reference to the casting of metal images. Well, I believe that everyone in this room today is involved in whoring after strange gods. Also, I think we should bear in mind that the biblical covenant and the destruction of all of these other holy sites is something that we find across the Abrahamic traditions, most notably in modern times with Islam, if we think of the destruction of the Banyan Buddhas in Afghanistan, for example. So this still seems a very long way from us in Berlin. You know, why the fuck should we care? Which is what I often feel listening to the academics. Well, this gentleman came along. This is St. Paul in his beautiful corpulent form. He's obviously, not skipped the pasta. Paul is pictured here with a sword of conversion in the Bible, and Paul's critical for us to understand because of the way that Paul formed Christianity for us. When Paul began, there was not really anything that you would call that. There's something called the Jesus movement, which was a collection of various Jewish people who were worshipping in synagogues and small groups. And Paul, bless him, had a very, very lucky break. And Paul's lucky break was that all the people of the early Christian church, the Jewish faction, were killed in AD 70 by the Romans in the uprising in Jerusalem, which gave Paul a completely blank slate. So when you read in the Bible and you read all the criticisms, for example, of Peter, this comes from very much a Pauline lens. Paul wanted to de-Judaize the Jesus movement. So he opposed circumcision, he opposed all of these things which were difficult for the Gentiles to go along with. And he created the universal Jesus and a religion that could be rolled out across the whole Roman Empire. And we're still living in the broken remnants of that culture. So what Paul did with his Christianity was he created a religion of transposition. It's universalizing. It mows over cultures. It says people are all the same. You're either sinners or you're saved. It declares a spiritual war on all the peoples that it comes across. And over a 600-year period, Christianity miraculously triumphed across Europe. And the missionaries, as they traveled, encountered stories of giants, of angels, of devils. And they wrote over our histories, destroying cultures and sacred sites using the justification that I read previously from Exodus. But the English had another idea. Rather than seeing the line of prophecy and the tradition of prophecy as dying with St. Paul, the upstart English continued the line of prophecy. Prophecy did not die, but continued. And these three figures are critical for our understanding. The gentleman on the left is John Milton. John Milton is the greatest English poet who composed Paradise Lost, which is the paradigmatic text of Luciferianism. If you're looking to understand Lucifer, then you must read John Milton, because Milton made a terrible error. Milton was a brilliant man, a brilliant thinker, a scholar. He spent time in Italy as a young man. He possibly met Galileo, and he created the modern English language. And he had an ambition, which he nurtured within him, to write the great English epic. What story could he write? Well, John decided to write the story of the fall, of Lucifer, and he created a fabulous and inspiring text. He aimed to justify the works of God to man. And to do so, he offered the readers of his book a series of moral choices between paganism and Christianity. But the problem is that the early books of Paradise Lost, Lucifer, alternatively Satan, he calls them interchangeably, is presented in the mold of a Greek hero. And all of the readers of the text fall in love with the wrong guy. Big problem. Thank you, John. Thank you, John. So John's followed here by another couple of great prophets, William Blake. William Blake continued to try to save Milton from himself, and he wrote some phenomenal works for us. Particularly of interest to people in this room would be The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, in that he produces a work where the devil speaks directly to us and offers us a whole series of challenges. Again, people make mistakes with Blake and they assume that Blake was in favor of the devil. He wasn't. He simply made a compelling case in the way that Milton did. And then on the end we have the wonderful Percy Bysshe Shelley. And Shelley is the first modern Luciferian. Again, this is something that the Academy has failed to properly understand. I'm crediting Per earlier. Per was right to point out that that Shelley was a Luciferian in terms of one of his works, The Revolt of Islam, but he wrote many others which critically place Lucifer as a salvific figure whom he ties in with the idea of Prometheus. So, these three individuals created the culture that we all live in, all of us, regardless of whether you're English or not. Anyone who's watched Blade Runner or Alien will notice that motifs from all of these figures in the Lucifer story are present within their work. And this is all explained in my books. But today, because I'm in a room of magicians and witches, I want to do something a bit more personal. I just need to give this background to start it off. So, you playing for me? So I'm going to take you to England and talk to you a little bit about my magical practice. Because when I write, I generally write in a way that people don't have to deal with the specificity, but today I'm going to be more specific and talk about the land. So this is Cornwall, where I live, at the end of England. And this blurry map, it doesn't matter. If you see all of the yellow dots on this land, these are all Neolithic sites. All the other coloured dots are other sites dating from the Stone, Bronze, and Iron Age, but the majority of the sites here are Stone and Bronze Age. So I live in a huge ancient cemetery filled with giants. So today we're just going to take a walk onto the land, which is very much an important part of everyone's practice. Walking is an important part of the practice. Being present in space is important to the practice. Something which is not several thousand miles away, but what you engage with in your personal works. So, as the ice retreated across Europe, people walked out onto my land, and when they walked out onto that land following the retreat of the ice, they found something remarkable. Not Alcestis, though she's remarkable. They found these structures in the landscape. And rather like Graham Hancock, they decided that it would be impossible for these to exist, and that they must have been created by a previous race of giants who lived in this place. But what we can understand as modern magicians is that these are both objects which have been created by the great elemental forces of the ancient giants, and they're also angels in their own right. Now, when I showed you the biblical images that they believed contained the homes of the fallen angels, well, this landscape contains exactly the same things. So when I'm talking about a fallen Albion, I'm talking about a primordial layer into which the spirits, angels, and demons descended, and they fell into rocks, they fell into stones, they fell into plants, they fell into the waters. And so we're moving into a land which is very much spirit haunted. Now, this site's up on the moor. There are several huge stone circle complexes around it. There's also quite a lot of magic mushrooms. But this is clearly a point of veneration, and it's also very much under threat. So to the right of this, there's probably a 200-foot drop and a granite quarry which almost consumed this and was luckily stopped. So these are some more of the kind of granite erratics that you find all the way across the landscape. And they present these almost puzzles, like koans in the landscape. So this is where I do my magic. This is a pretty wild place. And as well as the great stones, we also have, as England is notoriously wet, we have a whole range of holy wells. This is a well called literally Holy Well, which is found in a sea cave on one of the beaches. And these are very healing places. It's the work of magic that we do also requires that we look after ourselves, that we heal both ourselves and the people who work with us. That's Alcestis again. This is a giant piece of garnet. This is like a staggeringly large piece of semi-precious stone. There are no others. This has come from nowhere, and it's now referred to as the moonstone, as it's believed that it was carried from the moon and then descended. So when we're engaged in our magical practice and we're looking for things, we find these sacred places in the land and we find the spirits that are in them. This one's particularly good because it's covered at high tide. Most of the time it's submerged, so you can only get to it at the right time. Here's another one of the very important power places that we find in the landscape. This is a Porthcurno, a beach called Pedenvounder, and this headland is a classic cliff castle, which is very much a fairy place. And if you look, you can see the rock in the middle with a ring around it. This is a Logan stone. A Logan stone is a stone which you can move with one finger because of the way that it's eroded. And there are a whole series of these in the landscape which have important witchcraft connotations. Very often there's a story that you have to be able to climb onto the stone without it moving. So it's a physical riddle and a game in the landscape. But these Logan stones that they found that are spread across the place are very important angelic beings. And it's important that they're unworked by human hand. These creatures are the result of the powers of the elements and the way that they have formed everything. And when we think of the fallen angels, and when we look at the powers of the fallen angels, the powers of the angels, the powers of the elements, and the ability to read the elements and understand the elements. So these are extremely important things. So having looked at some of the kind of natural wonders, then we move to the constructed ones. So this is one of the most beautiful quoits or dolmens. This is a place called Trevithi Quoit, which is down from that first crazy stack of granite that I showed earlier. And this one's unusual because there's a hole in the capstone, and the midsummer sun aligns with that hole and casts a shadow. Now these are the homes of the dead. These are the homes of the ancient mighty dead. So while David gave a beautiful talk about the coffin and talked a lot about the wood, well, where I am, it's really all about the stone. And when you look at these structures, you find that they've selected the stones based on the number of large quartz crystals within them. So these are real star boxes. These are kind of initiation chambers, as well as the homes of the dead. This is me crawling out of one of the prettiest ones. This is a place called Tune Quoit. It's the same as the last one. This is a burial site, But the beautiful thing about this one is that you can get inside it, and there's kind of enough room to squat down and spend time and meditate in place. So it's a lovely opportunity to do work in the land and to commune with the spirits in the land. Very often these had burials within them. Again, like the Rephaim in Israel, these were very often excarnations. So the bodies were dismembered and burned and placed in pottery jars. So when you spend time in here, you're literally in the place of the dead. This is another massive structure at Zena. This is Zena Coit. The face that you can see here faces the rising of the midsummer sun. Behind this in the distance is the famous Crowley House, which is one of the places in the landscape where Crowley was meant to have been and caused a mysterious death, which isn't exactly true. But this is a very powerful place in the landscape, and we almost lost this. This was saved by the vicar of Zena, who paid the local farmer 5 shillings to prevent him pulling it apart and turning it into a cowshed. So every time we go there, we leave an offering on his grave. This is another beautiful photogenic coin. This is called a Lanyon coit, or these often get called things like the devil's milking stool or the devil's table. And you can see here in the winter that there's a moorland pool underneath it. So these are great places for scrying. So there's a lot of landscape magic you can do here. And again, although it doesn't look like it, this is a grave. And beneath it, about 6 feet down, they discovered some remains. But again, not very much. They're not rich grave sites. This was once apparently tall enough that you could ride under it on horseback, but now, having fallen in an electric storm, another elemental fallen angel event, it's a little shorter, but that's the way it goes. Here's another massive necropolis site. This is a place called Ballawall Barrow. And it's positioned where the Irish Sea and the Atlantic meet. So it's a place of the meeting of the waters, and it's a place of the home of the ancient dead. And like our magical traditions, it's been reused and repurposed and reused. So there's a Stone Age grave, and then there are a whole series of Bronze Age burials and interments, and they even found a late Roman coin there. So all of our sites and all of our magics are very often about doing this, about finding and repurposing places and working with them and understanding that we're simply part of the process. And this is Alcestis again, who seems to be following me about for some reason. She's actually on top of what the folklorists call a Holocaust altar. So these are the flat stones upon which they would place the dead and cut them open so that they could be feasted upon and reduced to a bone state before burning and burial. These are found all over Cornwall. Again, you can see that to her right there's a small depression. These look like moon cups filled with water, so it's very easy to get like holy water from these places. Holy water is again a very important part of magic that we do. And then there's another kind of site. We have a lot of standing stones. This is a stone called the blind fiddler, which in classic folklore terms was a fiddler who was turned into a stone for playing his fiddle on a Sunday. Again, like all the dancing stories. Very often these stones are meant to be the same size as the person whose burial they're representing. So the blind fiddler was a hefty fellow. There's another one I don't have a picture of here called the Raven Stone, where the warrior who fell is meant to be as tall as the stone by him. So when we read about the mighty men, the men of renown in the Bible, well, I have the same kind of angels in the landscape around me. This is Boswen's men here. You can see there's like a different feel to this. This is high, exposed on the moorland, and this is actually quite a feminine stone, and it's a place called the House of the Winds. So this is a place where you gather elemental power, and again, the fallen angels are very much about these elements, and the winds are a critical part of that. Prince of the power of the air and all that. Another crazy stone, this is the Hawk Stone. It looks like a satellite dish. Again, this is like quite an early stone because it's clearly been taken from the base and turned up on one end. And that looks out to sea over Lamorna Cove, where Ethel Colquhoun did her magical artwork. So this is kind of like a guardian over there. Potentially also there's a sea monster in Lamorna, and sea monsters are also amongst the fallen angels. So this is an interesting thing. Because it's called the Hawk Stone, it also shows how animals and stones and these kind of apports show us the presence of the angels. So very often you'll come to a stone and you'll find that there is a bird of prey perched upon it, or a raven perched upon it. So these kind of signs in the landscape and this contact with the angels and the spirits is very real and very present amongst us. Another crazy site, this is Minantol. It probably didn't look like this in the ancient past. There was probably a stone circle here. Although it looks like an unspoiled landscape, many of these places have moved or been moved around or walked on their own behalf. So the stone in the center there is still crawled through, facing the sun 9 times as a cure for childhood diseases. I've been crawling through the stone since I was like a small boy, so it's a lovely spot. But there are some other interesting things in the landscape here that you can't picture. So imagine up over yonder there's a tin mine called Ding Dong, which potentially, story has it, provided the tin that was used in King Solomon's temple. And there's also a series of other stones around it. And I wanted to end with this image, because as magicians, like sometimes we think a little bit too much about our circles and our triangles and our formal workings and how we encounter spirit and what it means to encounter spirit, and what does an angel look like? What does an angel look like when it falls into the land? And this is a hold stone in a series of 3 hold stones, and at the very moment we were there, the light formed this crazy vesica image with the bolt of light coming through it, pointing to another important fallen angel symbol. Here it's the flight feather of a raven. And I think that this is one way that we should think about what our magic means, what the angels mean to us, and what it means to be present and practice in the land. And just like to thank everyone for coming here to Occulture and for sharing your magic and sharing the time with us. Thank you.